This episode of the Psych to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives. Hello and welcome to the Psych to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and it's just me today wanting to talk about something that's come up recently, and I think it deserves a little bit of attention here. So I was recently a guest on the podcast Talk Your Abs Off, which is a fitness-oriented podcast, and I came on to talk about New Year's resolutions and SMART goals and just working to improve overall follow-through. But through the conversation with Abby, the host, we really got into this talk of how important intention is. And I've been really thinking about that. And I've been working to bring this into the therapy setting with a variety of individuals. But I think it really can be valuable for our neurodivergent individuals, and in particular, our ADHD individuals. I think so often one of the most effective tools that we have is developing informed awareness of executive functioning, being able to then use that to improve behavioral activation, task chunking, time blocking, and some of these strategies that can be so effective and efficient. But one thing that really those things I think can lack is the reason why. And I don't know that we want to get in depth on the why for every single step. I think that's just a recipe for us deviating away and not returning back. But I think it's important that we come back to it at times because it can help build buy-in initially, but we might run out of that buy-in before we're actually seeing the progress or some of the establishment of routines and systems that are going to be effective. So spending time from time to time, sharing, hey, what's the intent behind this? Why are you putting in this effort? What's the overall outcome that we're looking for? And, this came up when talking about New Year's resolutions. And one of the pieces that I was kind of being critical of is that it feels very, if we're using a SMART goal focus, it's very specific in that there's a stopping point of if I want to lose a certain amount of weight, or I'm trying to get this PR at the gym. And again, I think those are wonderful goals and things that we, I think can be very healthy to strive towards, but it kind of stops there. And being able to connect it with the intention. And by that, I really mean whether it's kind of our morals and our values, I think it helps our goals stick. And so we can be resilient when those barriers come up, when, the motivation is starting to wane and we're really needing to rely on some of these systems that we're helping our clients create. It can really pull from a deeper place. And I think of a place that we can feel congruent with our values when we're talking about intention. So one of the examples I like to give when talking about specificity with New Year's goals and New Year's resolutions is if we're trying to eat healthier. So I don't think that's a bad goal, but it's not specific enough. So apply that through the filter of the SMART goals. So let's make it specific. Let's make it measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-oriented. So if we have a SMART goal of, for the first 3 months of the year, I want to have at least 3 cups of vegetables a week. And after those 3 months, I will stop and assess if I'm needing to either increase, decrease, or maintain for the next 3 months. Good goal. I think, it meets all of that various criteria that's there, but it doesn't really address the why. Why are we working towards changing our nutrition? And so if we add that in when the summer break is coming, I want to feel like I feel physically strong and able to spend time with my children, so I can have the energy, maximize that time with them. I think it goes from a good goal to a great goal and a great intention behind it. So if we can pull on those threads periodically when, again, using these specific interventions, I think it really gives it some staying power. So I recently had a conversation with an individual who He's very athletic, very competitive. So we can, certainly pull on some of those elements to help create, some motivation and dopamine production there. But if we're only focusing on that specific goal of, I want to get stronger, we miss out on his reasoning why. And so that is so he can perform better as an athlete and he can feel more confident out in the field. And, if we're looking at, why are we getting up and doing what we're doing? That intent is going to be so important. And so I know that there's, things such as vision boards and those areas that can really be those helpful reminders. But I think the therapy office is a great space for this. So being able to pull back and say hey, let's remember why we're doing what we're doing here. How has the progress that you've made brought you closer to reaching that intention? Or how some of the barriers that we've been facing and the inconsistencies, kind of had us stray from that intention. And it can make for a very productive conversation there. So I think it's really valuable and important for us to take the time to stop and talk about what's the intent, what's the why. And overall, I think it just lets us provide a better service and support to those that we're working with. And I'm hoping that this is something that we're doing throughout. So, I think maybe its largest presence is in the starting point. So when we're talking about creating some of the changes, why is it important? So if someone's running late to work often, and they want to get there on time, hey, again, I think it is certainly an important thing that we can be working on. But, why is it important to get to work on time? And that can range. So, I'm not running late to, for my coworkers or for meetings, so I can feel more confident in what I'm doing. So I continue to have a job that can provide for myself, for my family, give me the opportunity to do the things that I enjoy doing, continue to develop and grow in skill. The whys are all around us. And I don't want to get just so focused on the what it is that we're doing to accomplish those goals. And I know I earlier called out the specific focus for my neurodivergent clients, and especially those with ADHD. And I think that there's especially a susceptibility of losing sight of the why. Or maybe not connecting the why to the progress we're making or to the barriers, at least maybe not consistently. So finding that time and space in the therapy setting. And I think, frequency is an important conversation to have with this. If we're doing it after every intervention, maybe a bit too much. Let's talk about it. If we're doing it once every 6 months, that might not be enough. So what is this Goldilocks range of just right when it comes to creating and maintaining motivation and pulling on, I think, the thread of interest. So when we can spark that interest or, connect with those underlying values, we can really, I think, find that sweet spot where we're feeling empowered. We're feeling a sense of anticipation. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it lasts. I hope it lasts, has some staying power, but it might be they're walking out the door and it's gone. But finding then ways for them to tap into that as well. So if it's, a mantra that they're reciting, if it's, looking at progress tracking and not only towards that specific goal, but also how close they are to reaching, hey, I'm at a point where I can spend, an hour in the gym and yeah, I'm winded, but I can exert myself physically. And wow, that then means that I can probably exert myself physically for an hour outside with my children during the summertime when, we have off, and I can really soak in that quality time. So I think intention over resolutions, and I think continuing to support and encourage helps us tap into a wealth of motivation that can help that follow through. And, I also mentioned earlier, recognizing when we're straying. And I think that's an important conversation to have. It might be a hard conversation. It might be one that we're trying to avoid. However, avoidance is only that short-term reprieve, and it's really not going to serve them long-term. So having that hard conversation of hey, I thought that this was the why that we were working towards, and yet it doesn't feel like we're seeing that follow through. What do we need to do to make that change? And it might evoke some shame or some guilt. And I think, we as clinicians don't really want to make our clients feel guilty. Yet one of the things I'll at times talk about is what's the purpose or function of this emotion? And so if we are sitting here and we're feeling guilt or shame, one, let's assess it for accuracy. Is this something I have control over? Is this something that's mine to own to feel a sense of shame with or to feel a sense of guilt with? But once it's established, and if it feels like we're failing ourselves, if it feels like we're not using those tools or those resources to try to create the outcome we're looking for here, then that shame and guilt might be fuel. So I like to talk about it with individuals where, if we identify that it is purposeful, and it's not something that we're just taking on as a means of creating a belief that we can create change, let's listen from it. Let's learn from it. But then let's move on from it. So let's use it as that course correction. Let's use it as that maybe hard but meaningful feedback to really get back to working towards that intent. And intentions can change. So I think it's also important that we're checking in to make sure that, we're not continuing to push or lean on something that's not relevant or doesn't connect. And, I know that Ray and I have talked about this before, but I'm really hopeful that, in connecting intention with values and morals, I'm hoping, again, it doesn't have too much variability. So if we're pulling on an intention that is, meaningful quality time with family, I don't necessarily want that to be something that we are then, no, I don't really care anymore. Like, if we're pulling on that intention of quality time with family, I'm hoping that that's not something that is then being flippantly changed or we're seeing a lot of inconsistencies with. If we are, then maybe that's not the intention or the value to pull from to, create this type of follow through. But we can also certainly change that overall focus or that compass, or maybe we have some conflicting ones. So we have to be curious with our clients of what their intention is. And also we have to be open and adaptable for when that shifts and changes. And sometimes I think we can still pull on a different intention with the same overarching goal. And other times we can have very radically different goals to meet that same intent. So, we can kind of pull on that creativity part for ourselves and really try to, again, explore different ways of creating that follow through. So I know this is a shorter one for today, but something that I think can be helpful and relevant, especially as we're entering into some of the holiday seasons. I know I called out specifically the New Year's resolution application of this, but I think it can also be, we have Thanksgiving coming up soon. We have the winter holidays coming up soon. And, I don't think it's ever a bad time to pull on, values and morals as set an intention, help our clients feel fulfilled. So thank you for taking the time to listen today. I hope you're able to explore with your clients or also maybe for yourself. What's the intention behind what you're doing and how do you have that connect with the goals you're setting for yourself? Create that alignment, help support that follow through. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.